Do you ever incur expenses on behalf of your employer? Well, if so, you are usually able to offset these expenses against your income and obtain tax relief for doing so, which in plain English means that HMRC will usually send you a check for a tax refund. Now, the best bit about this is that millions and millions of people are entitled to make a claim, but very few know anything about it. Traveling to a client or other temporary working location, buying tools or equipment that you need to do your job, working from home, and even washing your uniform are all examples of where a refund may be due. Welcome back to Tax UK, the practical tax channel, where we share straightforward tax-related content that we believe everybody should have access to. All we ask in return is that you like the video and, most importantly, you subscribe to the channel. Now, in theory, an employment-related expense could be anything, but HMRC kindly give us common examples on their webpage, and you can find this page by Googling HMRC employment-related expenses. The first example that they give on screen is working from home. Now, you can claim tax relief for the additional gas, electricity, water and phone bills that you will inevitably incur. It's important to note though that if you choose to work from home because you prefer it, then you won't be able to claim this allowance. It has to be the decision of your employer, which might be more difficult moving forward as many employers are leaving it down to the employee to choose where they work from. If, however, your employer is rotating staff to work from home, maybe to only have 50% in the office at one time, or maybe it's detailed in your contract that you work from home a certain amount per week, then that should be enough to entitle you to make a claim. The easiest way to claim this one is to use the flat rate allowance, which is currently £6 per week. Most people will claim the full £6 for any week that they had to work from home at some point, so you don't need to have worked from home the entire week. One day would be fine. HMRC are actually pretty generous with the flat rate method. In fact, if you use this method, then there are no receipts or no invoices calculations that need to be kept. The alternative, though, is to do a manual calculation, which involves totaling up all of the relevant bills and then allocating a percentage to your work activity. This method requires supporting documentation and calculations that would justify the amount should HMRC ever investigate. The next example that a lot of people will be entitled to claim is for uniforms, clothing and tools. With tools, you can only claim for replacing and repairing. You cannot claim for the initial purchase. With clothing, typically it's uniforms and protective clothing, such as safety boots that we're talking about and that you can claim for. Again, it's usually repairing and replacing, but not the initial purchase. But with clothing and uniforms, you can also claim for cleaning. Again, you can either claim the actual cost incurred and keep the receipts and details of how you arrived at those figures, or you can claim the flat rate allowance. Each industry has its own flat rate allowance. You can use the table on the gov.uk website to find how much the allowance is for your industry. If you can't find your industry, then you can claim a flat £60 per year allowance. Again, if you claim the flat rate allowance, there is no need to keep any receipts or records. But I do need to point out here that you do need to be incurring some kind of expense here. You need to be washing a uniform, purchasing tools of some sort to entitle you to claim that flat rate allowance. If you don't incur any of these expenses, then you can't claim this one. Next up, we have vehicles that you use for work. Most people will already be familiar with how this works. works. If you do any mileage on behalf of your employer, then you can claim up to 45 pence per mile and obtain tax relief. What people often struggle with though is when this applies, because you cannot usually claim for travel to your permanent workplace, which is likely to be the office, the warehouse, the factory, or the location that you usually work at. You can, however, claim when traveling to a temporary workplace. Now, there is detailed guidance on this because it can get more complicated, but broadly speaking, a temporary workplace is usually one that you spend no more than 24 months working from and less than 40% of your time there. Although there is more to it than this, and I suggest that if this applies to you, then you read the full guidance. A simple example of when this might apply though would be if you work in the office of your employer, but you often get sent out to visit a client or to run errands on behalf of the employer. The location of the client or the errand would usually be considered a temporary workplace, so the mileage would be allowable. Professional fees and subscriptions are allowable as well. If you need to maintain a qualification in order to do your job, for example, there is often an annual fee that has to be paid. If you incur that fee, then you can claim tax relief. Travel and subsistence, we've actually already covered mileage claims, but this will cover items like train tickets, flights, hotel, and food expenses when working at a temporary workplace. And then finally, other expenses, which could cover any other reasonable expenses incurred purely as a result of your employment, such as buying a laptop or computer equipment to work from. Now, you can actually backdate these claims for up to 5 tax years, which can result in a pretty substantial refund if you've been incurring any of these expenses. What you'll need to do is total up all of the expenses that you've incurred, add in any allowances that apply, such as working from home and the flat rate uniform and tools allowance, and then make sure that you exclude any expenses that have already been reimbursed by your employer. For example, if you've done 10,000 miles at 45 pence a mile, then that's £4,500. But if your employer has already paid you back the 45 pence per mile, then you can't include that in your total because you've already had the relief. If your employer only paid you 25 pence per mile and the official rate is 45 pence, then you can still claim the difference. So in this case, you could claim the difference of 20 pence per mile and claim £2,000. To submit your claim, you have 2 options. The first is to use the portal, which is designed purely for these claims. I'll link in the description down below. The second is to include details on your self-assessment tax return. Both will have the same impact, and I'm going to show you how to do this on a self-assessment tax return now. So when tailoring your return, you'll need to indicate that you have employment income and then that you had employment related expenses by answering yes to both of these questions. You'll then need to split your expenses out by type, whether that's travel, fixed allowances such as uniform allowances, professional fees, and other expenses such as laptops and computer equipment. If you then go to view your full calculation, then you'll see that the expenses are deducted from your gross salary before tax is calculated, which usually won't have been done when your employer was calculating how much tax you should pay, which will usually mean that you have overpaid tax and HMRC will refund the difference to you. If you are a basic rate taxpayer, then the tax saving will be equivalent to 20% of the expenses total. If you pay higher rate tax, then it will be 40% and then 45% for additional rate taxpayers. Don't forget though, you can backdate these claims up to 5 tax years, which could substantially increase the refund amount. That was how to claim employment related expenses via a self-assessment tax return here on Tax UK, the practical tax channel. Thank you all for watching. See you next time.